Welcome to the Hope After Narcissistic Abuse podcast. I am your host, Amy Helms. Each week, you will hear from experts across the country and even world speak to you on recovering from narcissistic abuse and even how to manage these relationships. You will also hear some periodic solo episodes on how to manage these relationships and what recovery is like. It is my hope that you will leave each episode with some renewed hope that you can and will beat this. Thank you for tuning in. Hey, welcome to another episode of Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Today we have Saeed as our guest. Kim is a renowned teacher, abuse recovery consultant, and best-selling author. She has over a decade of experience as a consultant and coach. Her work has been shared in nonprofit shelters and lauded by therapists and mental health experts. Kim is a survivor and a thriver after narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Amy. I'm really honored to be here today.
So, what are you doing right now with your work?
Well, I'm trying to branch out a little bit. I've been doing this work on narcissistic abuse now for over 10 years, and I'm really ready to focus more on the journey that comes afterwards and everything that's possible after we detach and heal from these relationships.
So that's kind of the theme that I've had, the hope after the relationship and the abuse. We talked a little bit about that initial period after and kind of moving forward. What do you tell people that they should do in that initial period? What advice? Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. Well, I say these things, first of all, I'm not judging anyone because I made all the mistakes possible in my own journey. And now that I've been healed from that for a long time now, and having worked with coaching clients for many years, there are things that we do to actually keep ourselves stuck and unable to move forward.
Right. Well, I'm guilty of that. I mean, a lot of things that I use in practice, I've learned from mistakes. And if we can't share what we've learned from mistakes, then we can't really help others. So I think it's one way that we are able to help is by sharing what we've learned, so others don't have to repeat the same mistakes.
Right. And this one is really hard because we do develop not only a biochemical addiction to the toxic dynamics, but we also develop, in most cases, Stockholm syndrome, which is just an offshoot of trauma bonding. And so one of the biggest mistakes we make is snooping on the ex's social media and looking at their new partner's social media and just believing everything we see on there. And honestly, the narcissist's most powerful weapon is our own denial and our own refusal to accept who they really are. And this is where this plays into, snooping on their social media and really believing that suddenly they have found the love of their life. And it's really incredible how many people believe this. They don't realize that they're engaging in confirmation bias because they already have, in most cases, an idea that they're the reason the relationship ended. And so when they go online and they see their ex with a new person, they're just absolutely certain they've changed. And we don't have any evidence of that.
Or even when we don't have that belief that we're the reason the relationship ended, it can be, well, why am I still the one that's in therapy or still hurting, still in pain? And wow, there is a beat. What's going on here?
Right. And the reason for that is that narcissists do not they don't attach to people emotionally, and they don't form trauma bonds. And so that's why they're quite capable of just swan diving into a new relationship.
So can you help our listeners understand how they can help form the trauma bond, but yet they're not a part of it?
You mean the victim
So
or?
the narcissist.
Well, trauma bonds are formed through repeated emotional traumas and betrayals. So basically, all the things that the narcissistic people are doing in our relationships with them. Most of the time, that's some level of lying. Usually there's infidelity involved. Sometimes, people find out that the person they thought they had a life with actually had another family behind their back. So, which isn't funny. It's just that narcissists are not attaching to us emotionally. They lack empathy. And without empathy and without the ability to form an attachment, they don't feel traumatized by anything, the normal things we would be traumatized by. So that's why, we are sitting around just devastated and crushed, and they're just off living, their life.
Right, because they've helped create that bond and reinforced it, but at no time were they involved emotionally with that creation and emotionally enforcing. They were the one putting us in the trauma bond, but they weren't impacted by it. So I think that's important for listeners to realize is that there was no emotional attachment. They can move on.
Yeah. And, people like us, the targets of their abuse, we generally do form PTSD and complex PTSD. And they don't experience any of those things.
Right. So staying off social media, which I think most people have done that. And, I can admit that's probably something I've, heard most of my patients tell me and I've done myself. What other things should people either not do or what should they do in that immediate period?
I would also recommend to stop hours of research on narcissism, because a lot of the material that we find online, while it used to be helpful, now it's become more and more confusing because some of the concepts are outdated. A lot of the material we read insists that all narcissists are suffering from a traumatic childhood, and now we know that that's not always the case. Some people do form narcissism with no trauma. I've had, I don't know how many people tell me, well, my ex or whoever, it doesn't have to be an ex, it can be anyone, had this, I thought that maybe they suffered trauma, and this is what I keep reading, but they didn't have any trauma. Their parents were wonderful people. So we're now learning that narcissism can be formed just from over coddling a child. It can also be genetic. So it's not all these Freudian-based concepts that other creators are insisting on. Those theories and concepts are somewhat outdated now. And if someone really wants to learn more about the narcissistic personality, which I don't really recommend when you break up, because by that point, you've already read everything.
Right. You have to really think, what's the reason I'm wanting to learn? How is this going to help me? Especially when there is so much conflicting information. I read on one site in preparation for a podcast I was doing with someone else's show, that someone was claiming there were like 20 types of narcissism. Like, no, there's not. We can clinically diagnose basically, one type and, a couple subtypes, but they're not 20 types.
Right. And isn't that crazy, Amy?
Yeah.
Because narcissism is the only mental condition that we do that for. I mean, maybe, just to throw out an example, like there might be 4 types of bipolar, right? Or 4 types of borderline. But why is it that we create all these new labels and come up with all these new concessions, basically? There are not 20 types of narcissists. There are, like you said, maybe 3. And this is based on the work of James Masterson, who's like one of the original pioneers in this field.
Right. I think people throw what we call the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of how we actually diagnose things, throw it out the window and come up with all these random terms. I mean, I read people saying like secular narcissism, a sexual narcissism, like literally 20 different types. I thought, where are you getting this? So research is not going to help in those times. Because if you want to go down a rabbit hole, you can, because there's so much information.
Absolutely. And honestly, I have turned my focus, if I am doing any research, on the dark triad, forensic psychology and criminology. Study the work of FBI profilers. These are the areas that are going to give you a real insight into the narcissistic mindset.
Mm-hmm. I've kind of done that myself, looking into forensic psychology and how the parental alienation window has been debunked, but it's still used. And looking at like court cases and the forensics behind that was definitely fascinating. That's kind of when I research, that's what I look at.
So those are probably the two biggest areas that I would, the two things to absolutely avoid are, looking at social media and doing further research into narcissism. Because actually this research is what's creating a lot of the cognitive dissonance.
I would agree. And blogs, threads, the numerous, Facebook groups, the Reddit threads, people are comparing, well, my narc did this. What about your narc? And then people feeling, well, mine wasn't as bad. So it becomes a comparison thing too.
Right. And, just like you and I, Amy, are different individuals and we, show up every day in different ways. Well, narcissists are the same, but they do have blueprint behaviors that they generally engage in.
So while people are avoiding these things, what should they be doing with that time?
Well, if you don't have children with the narcissistic ex, then going no contact is the best approach. And this is probably the last thing most people want to do. They might do it initially out of anger, but then they convince themselves that the narcissist feels the same way they do. So then they'll unblock. And then before you know it, they're getting hoovered and they're back right in the relationship again. So if you don't have kids, you want to go no contact. If you do share kids, I created something called extreme modified contact. I didn't really realize that's what I was doing. I just created my own approach because I do share a child with my narcissistic ex. And basically, he has no access to me through my cell phone, and he hasn't since the very start. I also would not let him into any of the places that I moved to over the years since I left him, but focus on keeping your space free from their influence as much as humanly possible, because it really is, at least in those initial weeks or months, it's like a hypnotic influence. So the tiniest little hoover is going to send you back into the relationship. So you want to make sure that you are putting up those boundaries and keeping your space emotionally safe.
And with the emotionally safe, I think, no contact or the modified contact can also be getting rid of things around us in our environment, our bedroom, our kitchen, our living room that are directly associated. And for me, getting rid of the bedspread, changing curtains, things like that were like monumental in getting it out of my house, even though it was not the house we shared together. But it was so helpful getting different colors, picking out different items altogether. So it was just nothing in there could be tied except the children we shared.
Right. And I absolutely love that, Amy, because I've done the same thing. Because yes, you might not even realize that there's an association there, and you're looking at the bedspread and you don't think anything about it. And then later on in the day, you're suddenly triggered because it was a subconscious association. And so that's actually a very beautiful way to spend time in your recovery.
Perfect. And you talk about that with the shared parenting or co-parenting. There's apps that not everyone is told by their attorneys or guardian ad litems that you can use for communication that are court approved, where all communication can be done through that. And that's a great way to do it because it's one, it's documented, nothing can be deleted, nothing can be modified, and you don't have to have your cell phone or share anything else. I think that's a great way to do it as well. I don't know if that's what you used.
Well, back in my early journey, I didn't know anything about those apps, but you're right. I think the common ones are Our Family Wizard and Talking Parents. And you can use those even if your attorney doesn't say anything about it. So you don't have to wait for that. And I would absolutely insist on using one of those apps. But if the person refuses, at least still use email, because with email, it's basically court documentation. Because you can absolutely, I think in most cases, submit emails as evidence, but you can't usually do that with text messages. I was never able, at least later on, to have my text messages submitted as evidence. And good luck even getting the records.
Right. And so, but not spending too much time gathering through, sorting through old emails. Again, I need to find that email from 7 years ago because that's going down that rabbit hole again.
Yeah, and it's probably not even applicable because I don't know about other states, but where I live, they didn't want to see anything past a year or two. So,
right. So, what else can people do?
Well, you want to make sure that you are engaging in some form of a healing approach, such as therapy, coaching, working with a spiritual healer, and also having some kind of possibly an online program to keep you on track in between your sessions. That's usually the best approach, is having one person that you can go to, a professional of sorts, and then also having that program, because these things are going to help rewire your neural pathways. Because once we're out of the relationship and we have the PTSD and the trauma bonding and the Stockholm syndrome, we have to do things that are going to rewire our brains. And this is another reason why looking at social media and further research on narcissism isn't helpful, because we're not rewiring anything. We're only deepening the traumatized pathways. So we want to do something different so we can get something different. And
I think doing the program, that interaction with the therapist or the coach, is also just engagement for us when we've been isolated for so long. If you haven't been in therapy leading up to leaving or, engaging in that kind of stuff, probably feeling pretty isolated. And it's okay to admit that, but these kind of relationships keep us very lonely.
Yeah, they are lonely because you've isolated yourself in most cases from friends or family, or, and this is another reason it's important to work with a therapist or a coach or a spiritual healer, is that you want to make sure you're not trauma dumping on your friends and family, because they're not always equipped to help you in the way you need to be helped. But also, we have to be mindful of what's going on in their lives. They might not be in the mental space to hear what we're saying. If we're feeling triggered, we may want to call a friend or family member, but if it's the same person over and over, then our trauma kind of bleeds over into their bubble. So we want to make sure that we don't drive people away by doing that.
Right. What I tell my patients is, if you call the friend or the friend group, talk about anything random to bring down the escalation, but save the trauma dumping for a session.
Right.
Just to get out of the mind or to get the trigger out of your head. Calling the friend is great, but you don't want to explain the trigger to every friend, because not everyone wants to hear it or can hear it or can tolerate it or wants to know that the world's not perfect.
Right.
So moving on, after people have started to feel better and they're on their way to meet friends, meet people, I know connection is so important. What are some things people should do?
Well, if you're thinking about getting back into the dating pool, you want to make sure that you have done some healing work because, I see a lot of people who leave one relationship and then just shortly after they're back in another one. And this is usually the way we end up in another toxic relationship, because if we haven't healed to a certain degree and we're not comfortable setting boundaries and walking away when we need to, the trauma bond transfers over to the new person. So we want to make sure that we have put in some serious healing work. I generally tell people to wait at least a year with doing regular healing work before thinking about dating again. And on that note, don't imprint onto the first person who shows interest or that you go out with.
Yeah, that's not a conversation to have whether serving your water is all about your ex-husband or ex-partner or whoever that, was a narcissist and, all you went through. It's not kind of a conversation starter.
Yeah, absolutely not. I actually have that in one of my articles because, first of all, if the other person is doing that, that's usually the language of manipulators. Oh, all my exes were awful. I hate them. And they're just,
yeah, red flag.
Exactly. But even us as the targets of abuse, we might say those things on, the first few dates. And really, this is when you want to actually show up and be jolly and, get to learn more about the other person. If you come in there talking about what all went wrong, that just puts a dark cloud over the whole thing.
So that is a hard question. And as someone that, I've tried online dating, it didn't go well. But, when people would ask me, why did you get divorced? Or, why didn't it work out? How's your relationship with your ex-husband? And those questions were very difficult to answer because I wear my feelings on my face if I'm, you can read me if I'm not telling the truth. So how would you recommend someone answer those kind of questions if rather than saying he was an SOB, what should they say?
Well, I think it depends on the relationship you have with that person. If it's just some random coworker that you haven't seen in a couple months, what business is it of theirs, really?
Yeah, well, I'm talking like if you're getting into a relationship or dating, those kind of situations, then it's a genuine question that someone would want to know. So how can we answer that?
I would say, well, I'm really having a lot of fun getting to know you, and I'm hoping we can save those conversations for a little bit later. Because I actually had someone do that to me, someone local who owns a restaurant. He's semi-famous here in the area. And one of the first things he asked me, well, what went wrong in your other relationships? And I was like, I don't think this is a good conversation topic for today. This is our first date. Needless to say, we didn't go out again. But I would just encourage saving those kinds of conversations for later, because that's really none of their business. They don't know you, and you're under no obligation to share that kind of information. I would just say, well, I think that's a topic we might want to save for later. Let's just try to have some fun.
So maybe they're not asking that question yourself to the other person as well, because then kind of be obligated for, what was the last person you dated or you dated recently, those kind of questions that would be normal in most circumstances. Probably not going to be want to ask the other person because we need to expect to receive that same question.
Right. Absolutely.
So what about what have your experience when people start dating someone and the person's nice and they're good and they do all the right things and it's genuine, but it feels wrong because it's not the chaos and it's not the manipulation, but they actually meet just a good person? Because I've had people just feel like this is wrong. I need to end it because they're so used to the traumatic relationship.
Well, if you feel that way, that means you're not ready. You're not ready to date, because once you start healing, then you start to be drawn to stability and you start to be drawn to the lack of chaos. And I hear that a lot too, Amy. Well, these people just seem so boring. I need to have that, those ups and downs. And I'm like, well, you need to do some more healing work. You're not ready. because if that's really what you want, that's what you're going to keep attracting. If you're breaking up with the good people because they're not exciting or whatever, then that means you have more healing work to do.
Right. So what are some other signs people may or may not be ready to seek out and start dating?
Another sign is if you are not comfortable setting boundaries and walking away. So, what I generally encourage people to do is to have, before they start dating again, have a list of boundaries and deal breakers. And you don't have to share these with someone that you've just started talking to or that you've only been out with a couple times. These are for your own insight into what you want and what you don't want. So
possibly something to share with a therapist or coach just to be accountable.
Yes, that's a good addition there. But if let's say you're dating someone and you've slept with them already and maybe met their parents, and all of a sudden they start acting manipulative or even abusive or just inappropriate, a lot of people feel like, well, I've already slept with them. I've been intimate with them. I need to make this work. No, you don't. Just because you've been dating a while, I mean, you've known this person a few months, it doesn't mean you have to make it work. You don't really know a lot about them, especially if they start acting in a way that's completely different from how they acted when you first met.
Mm-hmm. So, and our boundaries can be, like the deal breakers, physical, fighting at show, mental, social. So we can have boundaries in many areas, and it can also just be how we feel inside. If someone's, near us or the way they're acting, we get those heebie-jeebies, then, that's a boundary. So paying attention to how we feel inside.
Right. And even if they're not doing anything especially inappropriate, but like you said, you get that little ding and you're thinking, oh, that was a little bit weird. That means that's probably your intuition trying to give you a warning sign.
Yeah. Or if that ding goes to a flashback of the relationship with the narcissist, then yeah, that's definitely a warning sign.
And another thing or a warning sign is if the person that you've only been out with a few times suddenly wants you to change something about the way you look, your hairstyle, your hair color, your wardrobe. Those are early warning signs of someone they're looking to see if you're going to be complacent, if you're going to follow their command. And I've actually done that in the past myself before I learned about all this. So if you are dating someone and they want you to change your hair color and you get a picture and you send it over and they're just, gushing over it, all that's telling them is, okay, this person is a good potential source of supply here.
Or any comment about like how you are presently, like I like you now, or something like that, because we're all going to change. We're all not going to look the same way now as we are in 20, 30 years. So if they're paying undue over influence on our appearance, are they trying to make us their trophy?
Right. And this kind of plays into when especially with the online dating, they want you to send more and more pictures. If you have a good profile and you have, they don't need more pictures, especially if you haven't gone out. I mean, what are they doing with those pictures first and foremost? Because they can do anything with those pictures. And that's actually not a smart thing to do. If you already have a profile, you do want to include some different angles and a full frontal. But aside from that, I would not send any additional pictures.
Especially in the nude or topless. I know they're asking for it, but we don't need to necessarily send those before meeting someone, because then it's already kind of setting those unhealthy boundaries up.
Right. And that person, you don't know that person. Why would you send that to them? I mean, unless that's your thing. But if it's not, don't feel obligated to do it.
And also someone without a history of trauma and someone with a history of trauma is different. People without a history of trauma that want to go out. I'm in a college town. A lot of my patients are college students. They call it hookup culture, but that's what they do. But they don't have a history of trauma to go with it, so it's not re-traumatizing them every time they do it. But if you had that history of trauma, then it's more likely to be re-traumatizing.
Right. And Amy, there are people who just want to go out and hook up and, have different partners. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that lifestyle if you're okay with it, but I personally am not okay with it. And so someone like me who's not okay, I don't need to be sending extra pictures or changing my hair or doing any of those things.
It is worth exploring in therapy if that is something you're wanting to do after an abusive relationship. Are you wanting to go out and explore and have sex to have it on your terms in your way because you didn't get that opportunity in the marriage? Or do you just really enjoy sex and you're a sexual person? Because those are two different things. And I know the people that have been assaulted before will go out and do it on their terms in their own way and not understand that pattern.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that does happen. And I think it's worth exploring, but while being aware that, you don't want to form feelings for someone who's making it clear, well, this is my lifestyle and I do not want a committed relationship, because when you do get intimate, a lot of times you're going to form feelings. So you want to kind of feel all that stuff out before you explore that.
Mm-hmm. And if you're dissociating while you're on a date or you're being intimate, then there's probably something going on there. So I think those are another things to pay attention to when you're keeping that list of, non-negotiables or things to be aware of. Can I stay present with the person?
Right. I agree. And that's another thing, because we are human and we want to have intimacy in a lot of cases with other people. But that's another sort of red flag if you're out with someone who's saying they want a long-term relationship, right? And you've been on one date with them and suddenly they're making all these inappropriate sexual comments. That's probably not going to be the person you want to continue dating. But if on the other hand, to add to what you were just saying, if that's something you want to explore, go ahead and do it. Just know that some things may come up that are very uncomfortable. And it might be that on the first date or two, you're thinking, I want to go out and try this open lifestyle, but then you have those experiences. Maybe you're just not ready just yet.
Where you totally freeze or have a flashback, that's normal, but that's just a sign you need more healing before doing that. Those are all normal, and I don't think it's that part of healing is talked about enough with women, that it's very normal for trauma, but it's just a sign you need more healing, not a sign that it can't be done and you can't get there.
Right. Absolutely. And probably another early warning sign, which I had this happen a few times, is if you're out, maybe you've been dating someone for a few weeks and you invite them over for dinner. And maybe you have a young child or children in the home and they're telling you how to handle your children. That's a big no-no. And a very entitled way of showing up in a new person's life is telling them how to handle their children.
So I know everyone's different. Your list would be different than my list, which would be different than another person's list. But we're talking about generally for someone looking to date again after suffering abuse. What would the red flags may be different than the red flags just watching out for a narcissist before having that experience? What would you list maybe some red flags or non-negotiables just people can watch out for? You talked about the early, first date, talking about the kids. What else do you think?
I think too, if you are dating someone and let's say that it's long distance, for example, or if it's not even long distance, but in any case, you find yourself making all the effort, like you always have to drive there to meet them. And they're not making any sort of physical effort to meet you halfway. That's another red flag. And we talked about, probably those are the biggest early warning signs, or maybe they're on the phone the whole time. Even if someone's not a narcissist, I personally don't like when I'm out on a date having dinner with someone and they're on their phone the entire time, because that is kind of showing you took the time out of your day to show up and get ready and go there. And that person's on their phone the whole time. That is just, to me, that feels like they do not consider my time as being important or my company as being important. That's one of my deal breakers. I wouldn't want to go out with that person again.
I went on one, and just one, but he was on his phone the whole time. He ordered for me. When I said that I didn't like that item, he said, well, no, we're still getting it, and suggested going for a walk in the park, kind of near the restaurant. But it was kind of, well, it was dark and not late, but it was dark since it was the time of the year. But then he patted his pocket and said, don't worry, I'm carrying. And so that, to me, I was like, okay, those are enough red flags in one sitting for me. So I was like, I'm going to go. And he said, do you want me to walk you to your car? And I was like, no, thanks.
Oh boy, yeah.
But I think that meeting at the restaurant or meeting at the place, not at your house for the first time, would be a good suggestion too, if you're just starting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Meet somewhere in public. And especially if you do have small children, you want to make sure that the relationship's actually going somewhere before you introduce them to your children.
Right. I had one where I was salting something and the person said, aren't you worried about that salt? I was like, no. And I kept salting. But it was just the comment about my food, because any comment about your food, your body, anything that you should or shouldn't be doing, just anything over controlling, it can show up in the smallest ways that you may not notice it until you're fully healed.
Right. And Amy, I'm glad we're talking about this, because one thing that I started doing way early on, was paying for my own meals and drinks when I went out with someone, just going Dutch. That way there's no sense of obligation. There's no power imbalance there. And I always make it clear, right, even before we go on the date, I'm going to be paying for my own meals and drinks.
That's great. Also can feel independent and powerful doing that, when we felt, not having that ability before. But, that makes me think of, so many other ways in the healing when that power can come up in little ways. When you fix something at the house, when you do something that you didn't do before, reclaiming that power of, I can do this. I don't need anyone. I can do it by myself.
Right. And I think most women discover that when they're on their healing journeys. And I just focus on women because that was my experience as a woman.
Unclogged the washer, and then no one was around me. My kids were at school, and I was looking around thinking, well, I'll just celebrate myself. But little things like that were actually really big things, because I did it myself and didn't need help, and was able to walk through that process, recognizing I don't need help. I can do this.
Right. And it is so empowering, even the little tiny things, and I, like you said, I went out and celebrated things by myself. I'd take myself to dinner and get champagne or go to the movies alone. I have no problem going out alone.
I think one other thing that self-care is so, I think, overrated in social media and everything. From one article, it may say, go get a manicure. And another, it may say, go do yoga. But I think taking care of ourselves is so important from point A to point Z in this process. What do you tell people about self-care?
I tell people not to fire hose themselves because, a lot of times we get out and we sign up for the yoga classes, and we're doing therapy, and we're doing our journaling, and we're doing our meditation. And we have this list of 10 to 15 things that we're going to do throughout the week. But we're so busy doing those things that we're not always actually healing. We're just staying busy.
When you're busy, you're not present.
Right. And sometimes that might help in the very beginning to help you maintain no contact and to get out of your own head. But you can't, that's not sustainable over the long term, because at some point you do have to actually be present with yourself and process the emotions, process the grief, and start to form those new neural pathways. So at some point you want to probably clear away a good 80% of your calendar and just be with yourself and process things. And if you found one modality that was helpful, stick with that, because let's face it, some days you can't even get out of bed. So for me, then I would just sit on the couch all day and watch, like for me, I love Tyler Perry Medea movies. So I would just watch those on continuous loop, and those were actually healing for me. So you don't always have to be out and about doing things.
Right. I think that's what the world or we'll see on social media is do these 10 things for self-care. And that can be exhausting for us, not self-care.
Right. Yeah. I don't have time for that.
The couple things I did were things that I either couldn't do or wasn't really allowed to do. And, one was I started taking tennis lessons. And that wouldn't normally be on any like self-care list, but it was something that I was, enabling myself to do. And I was okay with it and I could do it. So little things like that, I think helped me along the way. But maybe finding something just that you enjoy or something that you gave up in a relationship because of time or because you had other things to do, or, I hate using this word, but I think it applies. You had chores or you had work. But finding something that you gave up for the person and start doing it again if you want.
Right. And, because that's part of reconnecting with yourself and rebuilding your inner identity. And those things are important.
Mm-hmm. So what are other ways to start that work? I know that whole, how do you reconnect and rebuild your identity? That's a loaded question, but how can we start that work?
Well, when we come out of these relationships, especially if we've been in them for a long time, we generally do lose our identities because everything about the other person was the center of our universe, making sure or trying to make sure they were happy and avoid making them upset. And so we just give up everything about ourselves, our values even. So just getting back in touch with your values, that's probably another thing to put on the deal breaker list, is anyone who expects you to go against your own values, because that's where a lot of the trauma comes from. But just like you said, kind of doing things that you enjoy, or at least once enjoyed. You might find that you don't enjoy that anymore and you want to try something new, because as you mentioned in the very beginning, we do evolve and grow. And so who we were 10 years ago might not be the person we are now. And sometimes we don't even know. And so these are actually kind of the things that I address in my Thrive program, which helps you reconnect with yourself, helps you rebuild your confidence and self-esteem, helps you figure out what your life purpose is if you don't already know. And the Thrive program doesn't even focus on a toxic past relationship. It's all about helping you evolve and grow and find out who you are.
I was thinking of a small example, but, I was never able to pick the state. Well, it's I say radio station. That kind of ages me a little bit, but since everyone's Pandora, Siri, whatever it is now, but I didn't like the music. And so I remember the first time picking it myself and being like so exciting. And it was just enjoyable listening to music that I enjoyed. So there can be probably a lot of simple things you may not even realize that you gave up, you didn't do, that you can start doing that will not take up any time out of your day.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about that, because really it's really amazing how some of the smallest, simplest things make you feel so good, because that's part of who you are and it was denied for so long.
Right. I went through a period where I was like, okay, I'm not cooking dinner. because I was so tired of, dinner be ready at 5 o'clock. And so I was so tired. I was like, okay, takeout. And it worked fine. But it was just, I was relieving myself of that. And it gave me more time in my day. And it was very relieving, yes, to not have to have the dinner ready for that door to open, hear the beer can pop, and then pop from the dinner table. I was like, that whole part of my day is gone.
Right. And it opened up some gateways for you.
Yes. So that 5 o'clock time is just so peaceful now.
Good.
So I think there are so many things that don't take time that we can think, just little changes that can help with that healing.
And honestly, I think those little changes like that are probably the most profound and the most healing. I mean, why go to yoga if you don't like yoga? I tried yoga and it just tore my body up. I couldn't do it. And I just decided not to force myself.
And with yoga, I think it's important because I'm not very good at it. I used to teach it, but I too many injuries later. But yoga can be traumatizing for some people. So if you do yoga, look for someone that's trauma informed, or be aware that, even a child pose, downward dog, some poses where either your hips are up or your pelvis is open can be very vulnerable. So if you notice, like, well, why can I not relax in this position, or why can I not focus? It's probably a trauma response. And so there's trauma informed yoga is very popular now. It's not, even though a lot of people don't know about it. So online classes are there, but if you're getting activated or stressed during yoga, there's probably something to that.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's so true.
It makes sense if you think about having to lay down and there's a bunch of people in the room, it might be dark, and then someone comes and touches you to correct your position and you're in a vulnerable pose. It's going to be traumatizing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. Luckily when I did try it, the person didn't come around touching everyone. I just, I guess I'm just not flexible enough, but yeah, I'm glad you brought up those points.
So you mentioned a little bit about your Thrive program, and I know I'm going to post a link in the show notes so people can access it. But can you tell us, give your spiel? How can people find it? What is it?
Yeah, so the Thrive program does help people reconnect with themselves, and there's really no real focus on past partners other than a reflection of maybe what has happened to you in the past that made you feel uncomfortable and made you feel bad about yourself. And so you can, it kind of helps you get back to the origin of maybe some traumas that you experienced, but it's all the focus is on you. It's not anything to do with the past partner or past abuser. And that's why I like it so much, because the focus is on the student, not anyone else.
Right, that's great. And I get your emails. You have a wonderful email that you send out so people can sign up for the emails on your website as well, right?
Yes.
Perfect. And I think, I have a course that would be almost like a precursor to Kim's course, the Hope After Narcissistic Abuse, because we walk through some of those early understanding, more of how you got there. And then I think that before the Thrive, it would probably work, beautifully together.
Yeah.
And the next round of mine is mid-February. I think yours starts in March.
The Thrive program?
Yeah.
It's open enrollment, so anytime.
And Kim, you're giving the listeners a deal on your Thrive program. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the program itself is normally $97, but I'm offering a $30 discount for your listeners and your followers.
So yeah, we appreciate you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so the link that is in the show notes will be a link that automatically gives you that discount. You can follow that link.
Right. And I'm doing that. The programs have been valued at a lot more than what I'm charging, but with the current, economic landscape, I feel like it would give more people an opportunity to sign up if they want to.
Right. It's such a hard time because there are great programs, but when you're leaving or just out or trying to recover, there's so many expenses and it takes a while to rebuild. And so it is nice to have people when they offer programs that are affordable. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely, Amy.
Any final words for people?
I do. When we first get out of these relationships, it feels like you're never going to be happy again. It feels like you're just doomed to be desperate and miserable for the rest of your life. But the mind and body know how to heal themselves if we give them the opportunity to do that. And that's why I focus so much on, what to avoid in your recovery and what to focus on. Because the saddest thing is when I see people who've been out for 5 or 10 years and they're still as equally as devastated as they were when the relationship first ended. And what that tells me, now I can't say this for everyone, but what that tells me is they're doing all the things that keep them stuck. They're still, looking at the ex of social media, looking at the new partner, the new spouse, looking at the family, and they're still just so sure it was something about them. And so we have to try to rise above that, because if we stay in that rabbit hole, we will not be able to move forward. And that's why I do focus so much on the self in recovery.
Right. And I love how you said the mind, the body do heal, almost like a lizard grows back a tail. But for people that don't know, when talking about the neuroplasticity of the or rewiring, our brain has all these little connections, and we learn through the same process we unlearn. So, when we're young, we write spelling words or sight words 3 times each, and that's how we remember. And that creates neuroplasticity in that part of the brain. In order to heal, you have to do the same process, but opposite. You're undoing everything that was ingrained in your brain. And so it does work and it does heal, just like you learn the sight words, and the to. And so it's kind of a similar process, but different because it's about mental health.
Right, exactly. It's learning by rote, basically, because you have to keep doing, it's like a muscle. You have to keep doing it and doing it to build it.
Yeah. And then once it's built, part of it you need to unbuild. You almost need to do it the same way. So you're unbuilding and building it back through healing after this.
Right. And what most people don't realize is that leaving and healing from this kind of relationship is a lot like deprogramming from a cult. So we want to be mindful of that we're not doing things that keep us stuck in that mindset.
And that could be, patterns. It could be behaviors. It could be doing something like having dinner ready every night at 5, or, it could be, always saying a certain thing. It could be signing up for a committee. I mean, there's so many things we do that don't even really process why we do it. But if you're doing something and you don't really know why, and it's not bringing you joy, or you're not doing it for, to fulfill another purpose, I time to re-examine, okay, well, why am I doing this?
Right.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for information about your Thrive program. And I'm excited for people to be able to participate in that. And hey, also sign up for your wonderful emails that you share. It's been a pleasure to chat with you again as well.
It's been a true pleasure, Amy. And I'll make sure to check out all your programs and offerings too.
Thank you. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, please follow, subscribe, rate, and tune in for the next episode. Thank you again for tuning in to our podcast, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. We hope you were able to leave with some renewed hope. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe to the channel, give us a review, head to the show notes for more information on the things that we highlighted. And there's also a link to the website for a course that we offer on the same topic, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Thank you again, and please tune in to the next episode.